You know that time of year in early summer when the garden seems so promising? Your tomato plants are finally up. The stems are sturdy, and the leaves are a deep green color. This might be the year it all comes together. You think as you stroll outside in the morning with a cup of coffee and look over the bed. For a short period it seems like it will. Then a couple of weeks go by. The plants bend over one another. It looked like new suckers appeared overnight. With twine in your hand, you were back outside attempting to secure one stem without releasing the other three. It becomes darker in the center. The air becomes more constricted. What started out as a neat patch of promise starts to become something you have to work hard to keep together. Thus, you follow the majority of gardeners' practices. You do some pruning. You increase your stake a bit. You irrigate. You eat. There's hardly any space left, so you advance cautiously. After then, the season comes to a conclusion and the harvest is respectable. It's not terrible, it's not empty, but it doesn't match the room, the work, or the hope you put into it. Many gardeners are familiar with that emotion. Even if you dedicate a significant portion of your garden to tomatoes, you may still feel that the yield did not truly outweigh the footprint. Thus, the mind looks for the obvious solution. An additional row, a longer bed, more space, and a few extra plants for the upcoming season. Because the majority of people believe that tomato yield is a spatial issue. However, what if it isn't? What if a tiny garden is being misused rather than being too small? Because some growers, including Amish growers, are able to produce an incredible number of tomatoes in a mere 24 square feet. The odd thing is that they aren't doing it by packing in more. By wasting less, they are achieving this. The majority of people make that error so frequently that they are unaware of it. They merely condense disappointment into a single, simple conclusion. I require more space. I require an additional bed. More tomato plants are what I need. And that seems acceptable at first glance. Plant more tomatoes if you want more tomatoes. However, gardens have a way of making that kind of maths seem humble. Because you often do not produce abundance once you begin adding plants to a location that is already functioning poorly. You generate traffic. Leaves pile on top of one another. Stems fight for light. The air ceases to flow as it should. Where it should dry, moisture persists. Disease spreads more easily. The plant continues to produce green growth, but not always the kind that results in a better crop. Thus, even though the gardener puts in more effort, more tying, more pruning, more watering, and more observation, it still doesn't consistently result in more tomatoes. That's the part where you should slow down. It's not always the case that a tiny garden is too small. The issue is frequently that the space is being used in a way that disperses rather than directs the plant's energy. At this point, the Amish method starts to diverge from the contemporary backyard habit. The majority of people attempt to cultivate additional tomato plants. The Amish work to improve the tomato system. That is a completely different perspective on the same area of land. How many plants can I fit here? Is one way to look at a bed. How can each plant live, breathe, and produce better here? Is another. This difference seems insignificant. Although it sounds almost semantic, it completely alters the dialogue. Because expecting the plant to accomplish more of everything won't result in a high yield in a little area. It results from requesting that it waste less. That might be trapped moisture, ground area consumed by growing vines, energy lost to tangled growth, or the never-ending labor of trying to solve issues after they arise. Squeezing more plants in isn't actually the Amish advantage. A well-driven cedar stake, a thick piece of twine, and self-control are frequently all that are needed to create an organized system that allows each plant to perform more beneficial tasks in the same amount of space. And the question shifts once you realize that. You start asking questions that are far more helpful instead of how to fit more stuff into the bed. What is the true appearance of a superior tomato system? It starts with a choice that seems almost too easy to be significant. The bed's shape is no longer determined by the plant. Many gardens subtly decrease yield at that point. Vigorous, indeterminate tomatoes, in particular, prefer to spread out. When left unattended, they spread out suckers, reach sideways, and gradually transform a clear area of ground into a dense green thicket. Although it appears lush, efficiency is not the same as luscious. It's not always the case that a plant that occupies space makes good use of it. The logic of the Amish is distinct. Instead of going out, grow up. You guide the plant vertically rather than allowing it to spread out across the bed. A basic trellis, a disciplined cage, strings, and stakes. The principle is more important than the tool. The goal is to raise the plant such that the canopy is no longer collapsing into itself. The ground remains open, and the row remains readable. People are unaware of how much that changes. A tomato's identical square footage begins to work harder as it rises upward. The earth remains open. Light can penetrate the plant more deeply. Fruit is simpler to see and harvest. Additionally, it becomes simpler to read the entire bed. You are no longer attempting to locate the primary stem by navigating a green mound of uncertainty. In fact, you may direct the plant. Additionally, you can begin directing the plant's energy if you are able to understand it. At that point, trimming becomes productive rather than only aesthetically pleasing. A large tomato plant seems like a healthy tomato plant, which is why many gardeners are hesitant. More leaves give the impression of more liveliness. At first, it may seem bad to cut them away, but productivity and size are two different things. A huge amount of energy can be expended by a tomato to produce stems, side shoots, and foliage that never truly result in a better yield. Without becoming effective, it gets busy. The goal of pruning for productivity is not to impose an artificial, severe discipline on the plant. The goal is to prevent the plant from simultaneously dispersing its power too widely. What crowds the center is eliminated. You keep an eye out for suckers that subtly split a single plant into 3 or 4 plants with the same root system. Although it may appear abundant from the outside, all of that extra ambition is still supported by a single root system. In order to prevent the plant from drowning in its own excess, you maintain the structure sufficiently open for the plant to continue setting and ripening fruit. To put it another way, you are giving the plant a more meaningful effort rather than just making it smaller. That is a very old form of wisdom. Better direction, not more action. Additionally, you may witness it practically. A tomato that has been supported and pruned is simpler to care for during the growing season. After rain, it dries more quickly. Because the surrounding system is readable, it reacts more favorably to feeding and watering. It is less likely to develop into a dense tangle requiring rescue efforts on a daily basis. You are subtly molding the plant from the start rather than spending the summer fixing it. Many gardeners come to the realization that space constraints were never the only issue. Uncontrolled growth inside that area was the issue. And after you realize it, the next section is as important. Where people never bothered to look, a large portion of tomato crop vanishes. The first things that most gardeners consider are water, compost, and fertilizer. These items are important. However, a quieter reason is why many compact beds function poorly. They are overcrowded in every manner. It is possible for a crowded tomato bed to appear luxurious on the outside while subtly faltering in the center. The light is captured by the outer leaves. The room remains dark. You can still smell it when you part the leaves 2 days after a July downpour. There was a stale wetness in the middle. At that point, tension begins to accumulate. As disease pressure increases, the plant starts focusing more of its energy on survival and recuperation rather than consistent production. The gardener frequently interprets that as a therapeutic issue. Perhaps some spray is needed, perhaps more fertilizer is needed, perhaps the variety was incorrect. The truth is sometimes easier to understand. There was never enough space for the plant to breathe. Not only do you save space when you train upward and intentionally prune, but you also create a pathway for air to pass between the leaves and light to travel through the canopy. That has two subtle but effective effects. It helps the plant maintain a more consistent rate of production, rather than spiking, halting, and struggling, and it lessens the conditions that encourage disease. Because the best tomato systems not only produce fruit, but continue to do so, stability is more important than most people realize. That is one of the subtle distinctions between a bed that appears productive for a few weeks and a bed that continues to be productive over the entire season. One is engulfed in flames, the other is inhaling. More plants are not the aim. More productive work from each plant is the aim. You don't have to compete to fit as much eco-friendly stuff as possible into a 2-4 square foot bed. It must develop into a location where every tomato plant has a specific task and the resources necessary to complete it successfully. Climb, get light, maintain adequate dryness, set, ripen, and continue. The mindset that most gardeners inherit differs from that. Instead of asking, how many plants can I fit here? You start asking, how much confusion can I remove here? How much wasted motion can I prevent? How much of this plant's strength can I redirect toward fruit instead of foliage, recovery, and competition? That is the heart of the system. More tomatoes and less space is not a trick of squeezing harder. It is the result of removing friction, less crowning, less tangled growth, less trapped moisture, less energy spent where it does not pay back. And once those losses begin to shrink, something surprising happens. A small bed stops acting small. It starts acting clear, manageable, productive, capable of giving more than its footprint suggests. But structure alone is not enough. A plant can be trained well and still lose momentum if the system underneath it is unstable. You can stake it well, you can prune it carefully, you can give it clean lines in good shape, and still, somewhere in the middle of summer, the whole thing begins to sag. The plant starts looking less productive and more exhausted. That is usually the moment when people start reaching for rescue. More fertilizer, more water, a spray, a fix, something to push the plant back into performance. But this is where an older way of gardening becomes especially valuable, because it asks a quieter question first. What kind of ground is this plant standing on? What kind of rhythm has it been living in? Rich soil makes restraint possible. That is not a flashy sentence, but it matters more than it sounds. A tomato plant can only handle disciplined pruning and vertical training well if the roots underneath are not struggling all the time. If the soil is thin, dry one day and soggy the next, low in organic matter, or constantly swinging between stress and recovery, then all your careful shaping above ground starts to feel harsher than it should. The plant does not have much reserve. It is already fighting to maintain itself. But when the soil is dark, crumbly, alive with organic matter, and able to hold moisture without staying waterlogged, the entire tone of the plant changes. It becomes steadier, less frantic. It can respond to pruning without shock. It can keep climbing, setting fruit, and ripening fruit without acting like every hot afternoon is a crisis. That is one of those truths older growers understood in their bones. You do not get calm growth from restless ground. And right beside that comes one of the most overlooked parts of the whole system. Mulch is not decoration. It is stability. In a tightly managed tomato bed, mulch helps smooth out the wild swing between wet and dry. It keeps the root zone steadier through heat, and it keeps soil from splashing onto the lower leaves. When summer rain turns rough, it does quiet work. But some of the most important systems always do. That one detail matters more than many people think, because once soil starts landing on foliage, disease has an easier path into the plant. A tomato bed that stays cleaner at the base often stays healthier higher up. This is the kind of quiet logic that rarely gets celebrated, because it does not look dramatic. There is no before and after miracle in a layer of straw or shredded leaves. But systems are often held together by the things that do not announce themselves. By this point, you can start to see that the Amish advantage is not intensity, it is steadiness. and steadiness shows up not just in the materials, but in the rhythm of care. Modern gardeners are often taught, without meaning to be, to garden in reaction. Wait for drooping, then water. Wait for yellowing, then feed. Wait for disease, then treat. That rhythm wears everybody out. The plant, the soil, and the person growing it. Older growers worked from a different instinct. Keep the conditions stable early, and many emergencies never gain much traction in the first place. The most durable solution is rarely the one that rescues the fastest. It is the one that makes rescue unnecessary. A well-supported tomato in healthy soil under mulch with decent spacing, airflow, and regular attention does not need to be saved over and over again. It needs to be maintained, guided, kept in rhythm. That sounds less exciting than a miracle fix, but over a full season, it is far more powerful. And once you start seeing the bed that way, abundance in a small space begins to look different too. It's not about pushing harder. It's not about asking the garden to perform some heroic feat inside a tiny footprint. It's about reducing all the little leaks where energy disappears, water stress, tangled growth, disease pressure, heat shock, recovery cycles, constant correction. Small space abundance is really a discipline of shrinking losses. Whether that means freeing trapped moisture, opening the canopy for light, or simply sparing yourself the labor of constantly trying to fix a stressed plant. And when those losses shrink, even a modest bed begins to act differently. It stays calmer in the heat. It recovers faster after weather swings. It keeps producing without the same dramatic peaks and collapses. It becomes the kind of garden that doesn't impress you only once. It keeps paying you back. So, in the end, what does it really mean to pull an astonishing harvest from just 24 square feet? It doesn't mean finding a clever trick the rest of the world somehow missed. It means building a bed that wastes less. Less space, less airflow, less light, less energy, less recovery. Old wisdom often looks simple from the outside because it isn't trying to impress you. It is just trying to work quietly, repeatedly, season after season. And when it works, the difference feels surprisingly practical. Less crowding, less rescuing, less end-of-season disappointment, more fruit from the same patch of ground. So, if your tomatoes have ever left you feeling like the answer must be more space or more plants, maybe next season is the time to ask a different question. Not how to grow bigger, but how to grow with less waste.